Sacramento, California is known for many things: museums, beautiful scenery, groomed parks, and lawns, but it's mostly famously known for being the center of the California healthcare industry. But beneath its surface, during the 1980s, it became known for something else. Not an incident such as Roswell became infamous for, or the Northern Lights, we all know other areas for. It became infamous for one woman, and to this day her name still is a whisper on some lips. If you're a true crime lover or lived during the time period, I'm sure you already know her name. But for the new true crime lovers curious about her, this is her story. Poisoned by Trust, the Dorothea Puente story. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome any new listeners and subscribers. I'm your host, Kathy, and welcome to Inner Darkness Podcast. For those returning or those who have been with me since the podcast started, thank you for coming back again and again. To some, she is known as the Death House Lady, but to others, Dorothea Helen Puente was just an elderly woman who simply ran a boarding house in Sacramento, California. The home houses mostly elderly and mentally disabled boarders. But before she opened the house, she, like many, held her fair share of secrets from her past. Born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California, she had a traumatic upbringing. Her parents were both alcoholics, and her father repeatedly threatened to commit suicide in front of his children. By 1937, her father had died, and her mother lost custody of her children in 1938 and died in a motorcycle accident by the end of the year. While working as a sex worker in her teens, she married a young soldier who had just returned from World War II. Although she had two daughters, one was placed for adoption and the other was sent to live with relatives. From the spring of 1948 until 1975, her life stayed in a never-ending state of chaos by being arrested for forging checks, 3 more marriages that ended in divorce, and an arrest for running a brothel out of her home as a home for young women needing safety and a safe place to go. Following her divorce from her last husband, she turned her focus on running a boarding house at 21st Street and F Street in Sacramento. She established herself as a true and genuine resource to the community to aid alcoholics and the homeless, as well as the mentally ill, holding Alcoholic Anonymous meetings and assisting individuals to sign up to receive Social Security benefits. During this time, she established herself as a respectable member in Sacramento's Hispanic community, funding charities, scholarships, and radio programs. However, in 3 short years in 1978, she was charged and convicted of illegal cashing 34 checks that belonged to her tenants. Instead of prison, she was given 5 years probation and ordered to pay $4,000. But by April 1982, when 61-year-old Ruth Monroe began living in her boarding house, things would take a final step. Ruth stayed in her upstairs apartment but soon died from an overdose. While Dorothea was questioned, she told police that the woman was very depressed because her husband was terminally ill. Sadly, her lie was believed and Ruth's death was ruled a suicide. A few weeks later, a 74-year-old man accused her of drugging him and stealing from him. Only this time, she was convicted of 3 charges of theft on August 18, 1982, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While here, she began corresponding with a 77-year-old man from Oregon. Soon, a pen pal friendship developed, and when she was released in 1985, after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence, he met her outside the prison driving a red 1980 Ford pickup. In November 1985, she hired a man to install some wood panels in her apartment for his labor and $800. She then gave him the red Ford pickup, telling him it had belonged to her boyfriend in Los Angeles, who no longer needed it. She then asked him to build a 6 by 3 by 2 foot box to store books and other items, to transport the heavy, nailed-shut box to a storage depot. Along the way, she asked him to help her dump the box at a local dumping on January 1st, 1986. A fisherman spotted the suspicious box. Inside the box, investigators found a badly decomposed and unidentifiable body of an elderly man inside. Although he was dead, she continued to collect her former boyfriend's pension and wrote letters to his family explaining he was not contacting them was because he was ill. Dorothea Puente was charged with a total of 9 murders. However, during the initial investigation, she was not immediately considered a suspect. She was allowed to leave the property to buy a cup of coffee. After buying the coffee, she fled to Los Angeles, where an elderly boyfriend met her. She had met in a bar, but he knew who she was from the news coverage on TV. She was arrested, and once her trial began in October, the jury deliberated over a month before they found her guilty of 3 murders. Once again, the jury debated on the other murders and wrote a vote of 5-7. Dorothea received life without the possibility of parole, and she was incarcerated at Central California's Women's Prison. She died in prison on March 27, 2011, from natural causes. She was 82. Thank you all so much for listening. If you have any recommendations, please feel free to comment or contact me. I'm on all social media, and they are all linked on this page. If you would like to support the show, you can find me on Patreon, which is linked as well. Please feel free to leave a like and rate and review if you enjoy the show. I'd love to hear from you guys, as well as your thoughts on the case. Please be respectful to all parties involved, and until next time, take care.